Montana Territory, 1877. The wind came cold off the mountains as the sun peeled over the ridge, and Evelyn Tate was already on her feet, shotgun under her arm, heart shut tight, like a boarded church. The wagon ahead of her was stuck deep in the mud, one wheel sunk so far she could not see the bottom. Her dress was wet past the knees, her hands raw from trying to dig it loose. And still, she kept her back straight. She had two mouths to feed. "Ma," came a small voice behind her. "Mary's cough won't stop." Evelyn turned. Her son, Matthew, barely 9, stood with his sister cradled in his arms. Mary was 6, too thin, her cheeks flushed too red. Evelyn's chest ached. "Get her back in the blankets. I'll find help." But there was nothing for miles. Just pine, rock, and the long road behind them that had already taken too much. She had buried her husband in Kansas last spring. A fever took him in 2 days. He left nothing but a broken plow and a debt she could not pay. So she packed the children and headed north, chasing rumors of work at a sawmill in Helena. But the mule collapsed 2 days ago, and now the wagon was stranded in the Bitterroots, days from anywhere. She had no choice but to start walking. She left the children wrapped in every blanket they had, tucked against the side of the wagon to block the wind. She kissed both their foreheads, swallowed the fear, and turned toward the trees. The rifle on her shoulder was near useless, rusty and short on powder. She carried it anyway. She had gone maybe an hour east when she heard hooves. She froze, heart jumping high in her throat. Then she saw him. He rode out slow from the trees, tall in the saddle, reins in one hand, the other resting easy near his holster. A bay gelding under him, saddle worn, hat pulled low. He looked right at her. She raised the shotgun. "Do not come any closer." The man pulled the horse to a halt, both hands going up. "Easy now, miss. I am not looking for trouble." His voice was deep, calm, not pushy. His face was sun-browned, jaw square under days of stubble, eyes the color of wet earth. She did not lower the gun. "You alone?" "Yes, madam." He nodded behind him. "Riding back from Missoula. My name's Jesse Trenton." Evelyn did not reply. He nodded again, slower. "You stuck?" She hesitated. "Wagon's back a ways. My children are sick." Something in Jesse's face changed at that. He did not ask permission. He just stepped off his horse. "I can help," he said. She watched him hard. "Why?" Jesse met her eyes. "Because you need it." They walked back in tense silence. She kept the gun in her hands. He did not seem bothered. When they reached the wagon, Evelyn saw his face shift again, this time with something like quiet grief. He looked at Matthew, then at Mary, still coughing in her sleep. "Let me get the wheel up," he said. "You get her warm." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded once. She climbed into the wagon and pulled Mary close. Outside, Jesse worked fast. He used rocks and a thick branch to lift the sunken axle, shoveled out the worst of the mud, then pulled his horse forward and tied the reins to the wagon tongue. He spoke low to the gelding, then coaxed it forward. The wheel groaned, but the wagon lurched free. When it was done, Jesse wiped his brow and stepped back. Evelyn stared down at him from the wagon seat. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" He looked up at her, then at her children. "Because I was one of them once," he said. "My mother died in a stuck wagon out near Red Lodge. No one came." She did not know what to say. Jesse nodded toward the trees. "There is a cabin about half a day's ride west. Mine. You are not going to make it to Helena like this." Evelyn stiffened. "You think I should follow a stranger into the woods?" He shrugged. "You are already lost in them." She did not answer. He looked at her, steady and quiet. "You can keep the gun. I will ride ahead. But she will not make it another night out here." Evelyn looked down at Mary, who was burning with fever. An hour later, she followed him. The ride was slow. Jesse broke trail through the pines, checking back often, careful not to push the horse too fast. Evelyn held Mary in her arms, Matthew beside her, watching everything. By late afternoon, they rounded a bend and saw an old log cabin tucked into a ridge, smoke rising from the chimney. A barn, a pen, stacked firewood. He had not been lying. Jesse helped her carry Mary inside. The cabin was clean, simple. A stone hearth, a pot of stew already warm. A bed in the corner, fresh blankets. Evelyn laid Mary down, then sat on the edge, her shoulders finally sagging. Jesse poured her a tin of water. "There is willow bark for the fever. I will boil it." She nodded, unable to speak. He knelt by the hearth, working in silence. Matthew sat by the door, watching Jesse like a hawk. "You got a name, son?" Jesse asked. Matthew nodded. "Matthew Tate. And your sister?" "Mary." Jesse nodded. "Well, Matthew, you can help me keep the fire going. That all right?" Matthew nodded again, just a little. By nightfall, Mary's fever had dropped. Evelyn sat beside her, brushing her damp hair back. Jesse brought her a bowl of stew and left her alone. Later, when the children slept, Evelyn stepped out onto the porch. Jesse was sitting on the steps, coat around his shoulders, watching the stars. She sat beside him. "You should know," she said, voice low. "I do not trust kindness. Not anymore." Jesse looked at her, quiet. "My husband." She stopped, swallowed. "He stopped loving me the moment life got hard. He left me alone long before his body did." Jesse nodded. "Some men are cowards that way." She looked at him. "Love is just pain." He turned to her then, voice low and steady. "Then let me show you love is healing." Evelyn stared at him for a long time. The wind rustled the trees. Somewhere deep inside her, something cracked open. She did not speak, but she did not walk away either. The next morning broke soft and pale through the pines, frost clinging to the cabin's window panes. Evelyn stepped outside with her sleeves rolled, steam rising from the tin basin where she scrubbed Mary's dress clean. Her fingers ached from the cold water, but her mind was steadier than it had been in weeks. Mary's breathing had evened out in the night, and her skin no longer burned under Evelyn's hand. She wrung the fabric out and hung it from a line Jesse had stretched between two posts near the woodpile. He'd done that sometime before dawn, without saying a word. Just as he'd left a tin bucket full of water by the door and a clean shirt folded on a chair inside for Matthew, not her. Evelyn noticed things like that. Jesse was out in the clearing, splitting logs with deliberate rhythm. His coat hung from a nail on the barn, and his shirt was damp with sweat despite the chill. Matthew stood a few paces away, holding the kindling basket like it was a job that meant something. Evelyn watched them a moment before calling out, "Matthew, come help me with your sister's boots. They need mending." The boy hesitated, then set the basket down and jogged over. Jesse didn't pause in his work. Inside, Mary was awake and quiet, curled beneath the quilt with her eyes on the ceiling beams. Evelyn knelt beside her and pressed the heel of the boot against her thigh, checking the sole. "Is it morning?" Mary asked, voice thin but clearer than the night before. "It is," Evelyn said softly. "And you're better today." Mary blinked slowly. That man with the quiet voice. "Is he our kin?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, he's just someone who helped us." "That's kind," Mary said, and then turned her face into the pillow. Later, while the children napped, Evelyn stepped outside again. Jesse was in the barn, oiling the tack. She paused in the doorway, eyes adjusting to the dim light. "I'm not staying past tomorrow," she said, arms crossed. "We'll go as soon as she's well enough." Jesse didn't look up. "I figured. I don't want you thinking this is something it's not." "I don't." She frowned. "You're awfully quiet for a man living alone in the woods." He glanced at her then, eyes steady. "I lived loud once. It didn't suit me." Evelyn leaned against the post, watching him work. "You said your mother died out here." "She did." "You alone since then?" His hands didn't stop moving. "Not always. I tried town life. Didn't take." She waited, but he didn't offer more. "You married before?" she asked, voice low. Jesse paused, set the bridle aside. "No. Came close once." "She left before the spring thaw." Evelyn nodded. "Smart woman." He gave a faint breath of something that wasn't quite laughter. "Maybe." She ran a thumb along the edge of the doorframe. "I'm not looking for anyone to fix me." Jesse stood, wiping his hands with a cloth. "I'm not offering to." Their eyes held for a long, still moment. "I'm offering to walk beside you," he said. "If that's ever something you want." Evelyn looked away, her throat tightening. That night, she sat on the porch after the children had gone to sleep. The stars hung low and full above the trees, and the air smelled of pine and faint smoke. Jesse came out with 2 mugs and handed her one. "Coffee," he said. "Weak, but hot." She took it with both hands. "I'm not used to someone handing me things. I'm not used to someone taking them." They sat in silence. "After a while," she said, "when I was 16, I thought I'd marry a man who built houses. He had sawdust in his hair and a laugh that made you believe in things." "What happened?" He married someone softer. Someone who didn't argue. Jessie nodded, not unkindly. You argue? Only when someone tells me what to feel. He looked at her then, slow and searching. You feel plenty. You just hide it. She didn't deny it. You think I'm dangerous, he said. I think I don't know you. He sipped his coffee. You're right. She looked over. And you're not going to try to convince me otherwise? No, why? Because trust isn't something I ask for. It's something I earn. Evelyn stared into the dark trees. Her mouth opened, then closed again. I'll stay 2 more nights, she said finally. Until Mary can walk steady. Jessie just nodded. She rose then, cup still warm in her hand. Before she stepped inside, she looked back at him. I don't know what kind of man you are. I'll give you time to find out. She didn't say anything more, but she left the door unlatched behind her. By the 3rd morning, frost still clung to the roots of the pines, but the air carried a softness that hinted at thaw. Evelyn opened her eyes before the light fully broke. The small cabin hushed, but for the quiet rise and fall of Mary's breathing beside her. Matthew shifted beneath his wool blanket near the hearth, his hand tucked under his cheek like he had when he was little. She rose carefully, pulled on her boots, and stepped out into the gray hush. Jessie was already in the yard, mending the rail on the corral fence. A knot of cedar branches lay at his feet, and a hatchet rested on the fence post. He didn't look up when she approached, but his voice came steady. Storm's moving in from the west. You'll need another day. Evelyn wrapped her shawl tighter. I told you we'd leave when she's steady on her feet. She's not yet. I'll decide that. He nodded once. You will. But I've seen what mountain storms do to a broken axle and a sick child. She crossed her arms, watching the clouds gathering low over the trees. I don't like owing anyone. Jessie glanced at her now, eyes unreadable. You don't. Shelter isn't a debt, it's a mercy. Evelyn turned toward the barn before she could answer. Inside, the air smelled of hay and saddle leather. She ran a hand over the mule's flank, checking for warmth, and found Jessie had already brushed the coat smooth and laid fresh straw. That unsettled her more than if he'd done nothing at all. She found him later by the stream that ran behind the cabin, kneeling beside a canvas sack. He was pulling something from its flat iron hinges, a battered horseshoe, a handful of nails. Evelyn crouched beside him. Where'd you get those? Old trapper's cabin east of here. Fell in last winter. I took what was left before the rot did. What are you planning? Fixing the wagon bed. One corner's cracked through. I didn't ask you to do that. You didn't have to. He folded the sack and stood. She followed him back to the cabin in silence. Inside, Mary was sitting up for the first time, pale but smiling faintly at Matthew, who was showing her how to carve a notch into a stick with Jessie's old whittling knife. Evelyn knelt and touched her daughter's forehead. Still cool. She exhaled, slow and quiet. That evening, Jessie didn't join them for supper. Evelyn found him in the barn loft, stretched out on a pile of hay with his coat rolled under his head. She climbed halfway up the ladder and rested her arm across a rung. You don't have to sleep out here. I know. Then why are you? Jessie's voice was low. Because you need space. And I've learned how to leave people theirs. She glanced at the hay bale beside him. You always sleep out with the animals? Only when I don't want someone thinking I'm waiting. Evelyn looked away toward the dark rafters. I've never had someone wait without asking for something. I'm not waiting for anything. She studied him, his face drawn but not cold. That's the hardest part to believe. I know. She climbed the rest of the way up and sat beside him, knees pulled to her chest. They didn't speak for a long while. I used to think if I just worked hard enough, she said finally, things would stop falling apart. Jessie's eyes didn't leave the dark above. They don't. No, but sometimes, he said, they fall together instead. Just slower. She looked at him, his profile quiet in the lamplight from the cabin window below. Why didn't you leave? She asked. After you helped us. You could have ridden off. Jessie didn't answer at first. She waited. I stayed because you didn't ask me to, he said. And I've learned that the people worth staying for are the ones who never expect you to. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest, subtle and unfamiliar, like the first touch of sun on snow that's held too long. She rose and descended the ladder without another word. But that night, she left the lantern burning in the front window. On the 4th morning, clouds pressed low against the pines, thick with the weight of coming snow. The light was dim and blue-gray, and the air had gone still in that particular way it does before weather breaks. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, sewing a patch across the knee of Matthew's trousers. Her stitches were steady, but her thoughts weren't. Jesse had come in earlier with a bundle of dry kindling and hadn't said much beyond a quiet good morning. He moved around the cabin without noise, never brushing too close, never lingering too long. There was something about the way he occupied space, careful, but not afraid, that made her feel less on edge than she should have. Mary was awake and playing quietly with a pine cone and a piece of string, drawing shapes in the air. Her color had returned some, and the hollows beneath her eyes were fading. Evelyn had watched her sleep the night before, listening to the soft, even pull of her breath, and counted it a kind of miracle. She tied off the last stitch and set the trousers aside. "Can I go outside, Ma?" Mary asked without looking up. "Only if you stay near the porch." Jesse, who was adding another log to the fire, glanced over. "The wind's picking up. She'll need that shawl." Evelyn nodded, pulled it from the peg, and wrapped it around Mary's shoulders before opening the door. She watched the girl step carefully into the cold, her boots crunching over the frozen needles. Matthew joined her a moment later, carrying a dull knife Jesse had given him that morning. He'd told him it was his now, so long as he learned to use it right. Evelyn hadn't said anything then, but she'd watched the boy's back straighten. She turned to Jesse now, voice quiet. "You planning to stay through the storm?" He leaned against the hearth, arms folded. "I've got feed stacked in the barn and enough beans to wait it out. I'd sooner be here than halfway between nowhere and Helena." Evelyn hesitated. "You've done more than I expected." "I've done what was needed. That's not something most men do without wanting something for it." Jesse met her gaze. "I want peace. That's all." She studied him. "You think that's what this is?" "It could be." She looked away. "I've lived with men who said that." It turned to quiet resentment fast enough. "I'm not the men you've lived with." "No, you're not." He waited, and when she didn't speak again, he moved to the table and pulled out one of the chairs, sitting with his hands resting loose on his thighs. "When I left Missoula," he said, "I wasn't headed anywhere definite. Just away from what didn't fit anymore." "What didn't fit?" He shrugged slowly. "A name I didn't earn. A place I didn't build. People who only saw the shell of me." Evelyn sat across from him. "And what do you think you found here?" "Something quieter. Something honest." She eyed him. "You think I'm honest?" "I think you hide less than you used to." The fire popped. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of snowmelt and pine bark. Jesse leaned forward. "I won't ask you to stay. But if you do, it won't be out of owing. It'll be because you want to." "I don't know what I want," she said. "That's all right. I've got time." She hesitated, then said, "The last time I felt anything close to calm was before my first child was born. Before I knew how much a person could lose." He was quiet. "Then, maybe you've lost enough." Evelyn looked down at her hands, the knuckles worn, the nails ragged. She thought of the years she'd spent bracing for the next blow. "I don't know how to live without waiting for something bad to come," she said. Jesse didn't flinch. "Then let me show you how to live different." He said it as if it weren't a vow, but a truth already in motion. Outside, the first flakes of snow began to fall, slow and wide, drifting like ash from a quiet sky. Evelyn stood, walked to the door, and watched her children laugh as the snow caught in their hair. She felt the weight of her fear, still heavy but not alone. When she turned back, Jesse was still at the table, watching her like a man who would never hurry her, but would never leave either. She crossed the room, took the seat beside him, and laid her hand calloused and unpretty on top of his. He didn't move, only turned his palm upward so her fingers fit into his. She did not speak. She did not need to. The storm broke quietly overnight, blanketing the ridge in a thick layer of snow that softened every edge and silenced the world. Dawn came pale and slow, the sun a faint glow behind pewter clouds. Evelyn stood at the edge of the porch, boots buried to the ankle, her shawl drawn tight. Jesse had gone out early to clear the path to the barn. She could just make out his tracks leading away, each step deliberate. Matthew and Mary were inside, still drowsing in the warmth of the cabin. She'd left a kettle on the stove, and the scent of steeped pine needles hung in the air. Jesse had said it would keep the lungs clear. She didn't question it now. The quiet was different than the kind that had followed her for years. This one didn't press or accuse. It settled like a bomb. Jesse returned with snow on his sleeves and a handful of eggs wrapped in a wool cloth. He handed them to her without speaking, and she brought them inside, cracking 2 into the pan while he shook off the cold by the hearth. Matthew stirred from his blanket and padded over to tend the fire without being asked. Evelyn watched him add a log and stir the embers with the iron poker Jesse had forged from a bent wagon spring. The boy's movements had grown sure in just a few days. Jesse leaned against the doorframe, watching quietly. "You didn't have to fetch those eggs," Evelyn said, flipping the pan. "I wanted to eat something other than beans." She glanced over her shoulder. "You could have said so." He shrugged. "I figured you'd know." Later, while the children played with a hoop Jesse had shaped from willow, Evelyn knelt beside the wagon. The cracked plank had been replaced, smoothed, and secured with iron braces. She ran her hand over the repair, thumb tracing the grain of the wood. Jesse approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "It'll hold through the pass. Might rattle some, but it won't split again. I wasn't expecting it to be done. You were busy with your girl." Evelyn straightened. "You could have waited." "I didn't want to." She looked at him, eyes narrowed slightly. "You keep saying things like that." "Like what?" "Like you want to stay." "I do." She didn't speak right away. The wind had picked up slightly, brushing snow off the trees in slow, whispering falls. "I was going to head out tomorrow," she said. "I figured. But I'm not." Jesse met her eyes, steady as ever. "Why not?" "Because I want to stay." He didn't smile, didn't step closer. Just let the words settle between them. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "I do." She raised her brow. "We build something," he said. "Not fast, not loud, just honest." Evelyn felt a warmth rise in her chest, slow and unfamiliar. "You think I'll be easy to live with?" "I don't think anything about you is easy," he said. "That's why I'm still here." Inside the cabin, Mary's laughter rang out, high and bright. It was the first time Evelyn had heard it since Kansas. That night, they ate together at the small table, Jesse carving meat while Matthew passed slices of cornbread. Mary pressed her doll stitched from scraps into Evelyn's lap and demanded a story. And Evelyn told one. Not about loss or hardship, but about a woman who learned to breathe again in the quiet of the mountains. Jesse listened with his arms folded, eyes soft. When the children were asleep, Evelyn stepped outside, arms wrapped across her chest. The sky had cleared, and stars scattered bright across the black. Jesse joined her after a moment, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders without a word. She leaned into him. "I've been walking through something dark a long time," she said quietly. "I know. I didn't think I'd come out the other side." "You did." She looked up at him. "You never once asked me to stay. I didn't want you to feel pushed. You don't need to ask now." He turned to her, voice low. "Are you sure?" "I'm certain." He nodded once, then reached for her hand. She let him take it. His touch was warm, calloused, steady. "I'll marry you," she said, not as a question. "Not because I need to, but because I want to." Jesse's throat moved once before he answered. "There's a preacher in Deer Lodge. I'll ride out before the thaw's too deep." She stepped closer. "We don't need much. Just each other." And under the sweep of stars, with the wind whispering through pine, she kissed him. Not rushed, not hesitant, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had earned every bit of peace she'd found. They wed 2 weeks later, with the children bundled in coats and Jesse's horse tied behind the preacher's cabin. The ring Jesse gave her was a plain band carved from antler, shaped by his hand. Evelyn wore it like armor. She took his name only because she chose to, and when they rode back up the pass, the wagon swaying beneath them, she held his hand the whole way. Spring came slow to the mountains. Snow receded in wide patches, and green crept back into the hills. Jesse planted a garden behind the cabin. Evelyn stitched curtains from a bolt of muslin found in Helena. Matthew helped split wood, and Mary collected eggs each morning with her braids swinging behind her. They built a hen house. Then a smoke shed. Jesse taught Evelyn to shoot clean and true, and she taught him how to read her daughter's silences. They slept side by side each night, warmth shared without words, and when Jesse woke from old memories that left his breath shallow, Evelyn never asked. She just reached for his hand and waited until he came back. There were no grand declarations, just the long, daily act of choosing one another. And in that wild, quiet place, where the world had once taken too much, they found something that held. They lived. Together, not perfectly, but wholly, and always in love.